additionally completed a year of preventive cardiology fellowship at Hartford Hospital and an advanced cardiovascular imaging fellowship at the University of California, San Francisco. Her clinical and research interests include cardiac imaging, cardiovascular prevention, and women's cardiovascular disease. She's the early career board member of Society of CMR and serves as a social media advisor to the Journal of the American College of Cardiology. As we all know, she's the author of multiple high-impact publications discussing the role of social media in cardiology. Thank you so much for being here, Purvi, and welcome to Houston Methodist.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm truly honored to be here with all of you. I had been listening to this channel since I was a trainee, a resident aspiring to be a cardiologist, and it's very, very grateful to all of you for inviting me and speaking on this topic that is very dear to my heart and applicable to my own personal journey. So let me share the screen. So as you all know, I'll be speaking about role of social media during cardiovascular fellowship and how it pertains to the cardiovascular trainees. So if you think that some of the things I do online bother you, it's not my fault. It's actually my generation, right? And these are my additional disclosures. So when I started thinking about the objectives of this talk and how I want to design this talk, I thought about the challenges that a fellowship trainee may face, and what exactly we aspire to do when we are a fellow in cardiology. So I think that the first and foremost, we all want to learn more about cardiovascular science. We want to make our clinical decisions evidence-based, not opinion-based, and also develop the independent decision making, in this process as we go from first year to third year fellowship. I hate to say this, but can everyone mute themselves? The second thing, after you learn and as you progress, you want to see that clinical as well as research advancement in yourself. You want to collaborate, publish. You want to apply that knowledge that you have gained into practice and see how you make informed decisions with the patients, but also develop a niche. And this is where I think social media shines, and we'll talk more about it. And finally, but not the least, particularly in the last years of fellowship, we want to gain that visibility so that it aids in the job search in the later years, and also showcase the expertise as you are developing yourself from FIT to an early career cardiovascular professional. So my job today is basically take the role of social media and show you how it is applicable to all these steps of cardiovascular fellowship and how social media can help you through all these. So let's talk about learning, since that is going to be the first and foremost and probably the most important thing that social media teaches us, in my opinion. So if we look at a millennial trainee, things have changed. The training cardiovascular fellowship has changed quite a bit. I think a lot of restrictions on the duty hours for the good, and with the advances in the electric medical record system, this paper showed that almost 40% of our trainees are spending time on computer. And if you look at the overall medical education in United States training program, only around 2% of time is spent on dedicated medical education. And obviously we are all always fighting with the time, and our duties as taking care of patients, learning the procedures, getting all those level 2 and level 3 expertise into different subspecialty, and not but the least, the rapidly evolving this published data, which I have few slides that I'd like to focus on. So I think one of the solutions that I personally see to all this is on-the-go learning, and the importance of asynchronous learning, since it is not bound to any location, any time, and it can happen at any time, anywhere, not particularly within the hospital. So now come on the second side of the things, right? So if we look at the way the print media has developed, so let's go back to 1400, right? So every letter, every word needed to be written, handwritten, and the books were extremely expensive, and it was only, they were only affordable to a really high class. And then print media came into play the first time. It was in 1700 when the books were able to be printed and published. And think of how far we have come along now to have all that knowledge on our fingertips. But with this, I also would like to point out to you, this was the first clinical trial, and that was in vitamin C role in scurvy on this ship, and this was published in 1753, but it was only till 1795, so many years later, almost 40 years later, that it came to clinical practice. And if you think that things have changed now, I would tell you that, you're wrong. So still there is a significant time.
Neck. We should go through the neck. So the heart failure guys don't want to do it. They don't want to do it.
Can everyone mute themselves? I'm sorry to keep saying this. So if we look at, back in the day, there was so much of leg time, but now, even now, if we look at a research paper comes out, and then till when it goes into practice, it's almost leg time of 17 years. And this paper was published, latest. So what I'm trying to tell you is, on, one hand, we have all these responsibility. On other hand, we have this leg time that is there, since when the published data is out till when it goes into clinical practice, but also more importantly, the doubling time for medical education. So 1950, to double the knowledge that you had to teach a trainee, it took 50 years to come up with that much of new knowledge. Fast forward now in 2020, guess 73 days, and you double the amount of knowledge is out there for a cardiovascular trainee to learn, right? So what it means is, basically, if you take a medical school trainee in 2020, whatever they have learned in first 3 years of medical school, by the time this decade is over in end of 2020, it will be only 6% of what is known at the end of 2020. And this is mind-boggling. The knowledge is doubling. And why, and we have seen this, right? There is like exponential growth of scientific journals every day. There are new journals coming up. And with cardiovascular science, we all struggle to keep up with everything that is out there. So what I'm trying to tell you is that, number one, we have lots of knowledge. Number two, we have leg time between when this knowledge is published till the time it come into clinical practice. So we always have been living in this information paradox, the knowledge paradox, where we have lots of information around us, but what exactly we need is this clinically relevant, bite sizes, essence-like educational pearls, particularly in fellowship, because you are juggling with all these other duties. And I think this is where, social media shines, right? So how the learning on Cardio Twitter, so it's great, it's incredible, it's nothing that we have seen before, and that is because of the dissemination, the way the communication is carried out, and how the entire data is tied together by some unified hashtags. So this dissemination, it's rapid, it's worldwide, but most importantly, it's free and it's around the clock. So it's asynchronous. 3 a.m, if you are on call and you have a patient and you want to look up something, or you have time to kill, you can go on Twitter and learn about some papers, because someone in Europe may be posting at the same time about a case or a paper, right? So this is what we need, is this synoptic clinical educational material to keep up with this medical knowledge is out there. And I would argue that it is way more important at the level, trainee level, than at the advanced cardiovascular practitioner level. So every morning, I love this slide that I put together for another talk, but I think every morning this bullet train comes journals, right? So every journal has a social media account. They want to increase their visibility, and every morning you have these papers that are put out by journal that are thought to be high yield by their own editors, right? So the second thing I want to focus on, why the learning is really great on Cardio Twitter, is because of the communication. The way the information has been communicated is concise, and probably the most important as it pertains to early career like me and fellows in training like you is it's non-hierarchical. So basically, in spite of your PubMed may not have 300 publication, but still you have a voice on that podium. And I think that's very powerful. So what I mean by concise, so if we look at the ESC lipid guidelines, these came out last year. There were total 78 pages, and any of us, we know that when you want to look into guidelines, you really have to put this half day aside where you go into depth. You take notes, you try to digest all the information. But what I had done, I was at ESC and I prepared this tutorial that was pertaining to the main findings, that as for the lipid guidelines that had come out. I would say that this basically sometimes, when this information is presented in a concise manner, you can gain this information. It's, it's free, it's digestible, it's written in a simple, clinically relevant points, because another cardiovascular professional who's a social media educator may be putting it together for you. And there are many of us. This is just an example that I'm sharing. But I think that this digestible information, gains you more insight into the guidelines. And what I would say is that probably would help you understand it better, but also you may be interested in the topic where later on you may deep dive into the paper or the guideline itself, because now you're intrigued what exactly it has to say, not only from the information that is presented to you, but also the discussion that is going on the thread simultaneously. And the third thing why this paradigm shift is brought upon is because all this data is unified, and it's tied together by hashtag, right? So this is from a couple of my papers, and you can see that almost everything in cardiology now has a hashtag, and this is all very rapid in last 3 years or so that we are seeing this. But you have subspecialty hashtags, you have organizational hashtags, you have conference hashtag, and by just putting that hashtag in, you will be able to see what discussions have been going through. This is I do cardiac imaging, and these are all the imaging hashtags as it pertains to CV imaging. And the growth of these hashtags have been tremendous, and I would say that all these hashtags are widely spread. They're adopted worldwide. So it's not limited to a region or a practice or some individuals. They're very popular. And so far, Twitter has not given us a way where we can store all the hashtags and kind of go through them every morning. You still have to go to individual hashtag, but the talk is that it is coming where we'll be able to store the hashtag in one place, and you can gain access to all the knowledge that has been imparted by just going through this list of hashtags. So this is a very good article that was in JAC from my friend Akhil Narang, and he talks about modes of learning as the times are changing for cardiologists, and obviously the journey starts as a fellow in training. And I would say that almost all of these pertain to social media, right? So when I look at a case-based scenario that is presented on social media, that's an example of adaptive learning. The images and videos. This is the Doppler. What do you think about this? Why is this not this? All those discussions, that's a flipped classroom like examples. Conference slides are made available forever. And just take an example of recent ESC Congress and how much data was out there. And then, simulation learning technique, particularly, I see this for the interventional field. You pick a case example and they'll be discussing the type of catheter they use, what kind of technique they will go for, what exactly is the imaging they would obtain before or after or during the procedure. So I think that the modes of learning have truly expanded with social media and this community that is coming together, ready to produce, all the content that is pertaining to cardiovascular disease. So what kind of content is being out there, right? So I've taken some examples that I have done. So this was, an example of a tutorial where, I do cardiac imaging, and this was basically a case of mitral regurgitation where I go into detail of how the direction of mitral regurgitation gives you an insight into the etiology of what it may be. This is basically the series of threads that are put together. They're called tutorials. You probably all have seen it. And then this was another example. Recently, the ESC guidelines came out, and there was a whole page dedicated to Minoka cardiac MRI gain class 1 recommendation for obtaining in cases of Minoka. And again, I put together this tutorial. I was on call. This was a Sunday, and it was an extremely busy day for me. It took me 45 minutes to develop this tutorial. And, I didn't have to put together the bibliographic references or anything. And it was easy for me. I basically expanded on the guidelines, talked about the papers that they have spoken about in the guidelines, and kind of gave a deep dive to the readers. And, it had like almost 38,000 impressions, and almost 1,700 individuals had interacted, with this thread, whether it was in form of reading or commenting. So this just goes to tell you, like particularly for the topic where there are the reviews that are already published in high-end journals, but you want to this is the area of your interest, and you want to establish yourself. This is an easy publication where I am giving insight to the readers into the literature that exist out there, why the guidelines are put the way they are put, and basically making them digest this complex scientific data that may be around. This was a case that just came up. I was on consult service. There was a patient with critical limb ischemia, had bypass, and in second day after the bypass, got a huge NSTEMI, got a SVG-PCI, and I was discussing with my fellows, what can be the anticoagulation recommendations and what may be the evidence base behind it, and decided to put it on social media, and the response was tremendous. And the great thing is that almost every response, for a good social media educator, almost every response consist of the data that they were presenting. These were not opinion-based facts. These were opinions that were based on the evidence-based, right? So there were papers, that were linked, and you could take a deep dive and form your own opinion after going through these series of tweets that were put together by the other social media educators. This was an example of a case discussion. Would never forget this case. This was my first year as a cardiology attending, and we had this patient who had presented, with a 20-year-old with significant family history, Minoka-like presentation, and had this delayed enhancement in the lateral wall. And given his family history, I was a bit nervous calling the left-sided ARVD with patients and family's permission, decided to put this case, on Twitter. And sure enough, it it ended up being this virtual multimodality conference where lots of evidence was shared. So this was seen by, again, thousands of people. There were more than 100 replies throughout the thread from all around the world, and it ended up being a very good case-based discussion where not only I learned, but people who were following me or people who had participated into it learned from this rich discussion that included cardiac imagers, radiologists, cardiologists, electrophysiologists, and this ended up being kind of like a virtual multimodality conference. So I say this often, that World Wide Web is the new blackboard that we all have access to. I could not forget mentioning the techniques and how the role of social media and development of some of the techniques. So we all have known the success of Radial First on Twitter, but more importantly, I wanted to mention the left distal transradial axis. So the paper, the technique was described initially in 1995, another paper in 2012, 2017, this interventional cardiologist, Dr. Kiminage, he decided to put a YouTube video. It was seen by more than 3,000 people. And what he decided was he gave a thumbs up sign on Twitter and said that, this is the technique. He described the technique into a tutorial, tagged the video, and gave a thumbs up to anyone who came with a left, who performed left distal radial axis. And then he decided to take one step forward and decided to give a virtual award to anyone who did the technique and shared the picture. And sure enough, worldwide, there was a huge response. He ended up giving 100 virtual awards. And then later on, they ended up publishing the real world uptake into left distal radial. Another example, which is again another great example, is the His bundle pacing. And again, the technique had been out. There had been multiple discussion on the His bundle pacing using this hashtag don't diss the His. Ended up being this topic that was discussed in the conferences and stuff. There was a huge uptake in the utilization of the hashtag. And in fact, what you saw was there was this paper that came out on His bundle pacing and what impact social media made. What they saw was as the hashtag uptake had gone up, what else went up was the His bundle pacing implantation, and they were able to get this data because there's one particular company that makes the lead, and they were able to track the lead implantation throughout the United States. But this was a very neatly done paper, and the conclusion of the paper was that it's probably that these conversations on social media that are encouraging the fellow electrophysiologists to adopt the technique because it is a safe and efficacious technique, and hence you saw this uptake in the use. So I, one of my trainees, she decided to look it up, but what we tried to look was how this use of the hashtag don't diss the His was related to the publication on PubMed on the topic. And there was some correlation, and we are going to submit this for a paper later in the year. So when we look at the fellow in training content, there has been a lot of initiatives, particularly by American College of Cardiology, FIT Council, and the main things that I would like to highlight is the FIT Survival Guide that was last summer and the summer before that, where they did these tutorials on the basic topics on in cardiology, FIT tweet-ups, which were the case-based discussions put by the FIT and commented by all the attendings. And then the fellow first, that was started again in order to give the fellows the first chance to responding at a case-based vignette and to comment within the first 24 hours, followed by comments by the cardiologist in practice to support the diagnosis, what is presented. So these are some of the examples. So FIT survival guide, the FIT tweet up, and then the fellows first. So check those out and see the content if it is useful to you. So we talked about this, and we talked about how case reports on social media, it's actually, it's very rapid, it's global, it's free and open. And then also how the social media pertains to cardiac imaging, given the cardiac imaging is an imaging driven field, and social media loves imaging, loves the images and the videos and the multi media vignettes. Um, so the third, but not the least, I would like to speak about the non-hierarchical discussion, the open discussion that go on, and the culture in 2020 is that the culture of permission is gone. The podium is open and it's free, right? But if we look at this Nature paper, and this was, I think, in Science, use of Twitter uptake in Science has been way more, before it came into cardiology. But this Nature paper showed that most of the scientists, that they were following Twitter to follow the discussion, right? So, and these discussion happen because there are these open, discussion amongst the cardiologists, that from different subspecialties that are going on with different point of view. And we all know that, this post-publication peer review, we benefit tremendously from it, right? So take, for example, we all know how the quality of papers during, COVID pandemic has been modest. Chetan Shinoy, he is a CMR researcher, and he decided to take all the papers that were published for COVID and cardiovascular MRI and try to give his own opinion as a researcher, as a scientist, and in CMR, why this was applicable or not applicable. So he literally took every paper, 10 papers, and he gave his comment on what he thought of every single case report or the papers that were presented. And once you go through this, a thread like this, I think that at the end of the day, you have some clinical judgment and you'll develop your own opinion, or you'll be empowered to think one way or other because it is supported, by other researcher. So I think that so this post-publication peer review is very important, right? And I cannot not mention the trials as they come out. And the biggest example is Ischemia Trial. And I just don't know when Ischemia is going to stop trending, because it's still trending. And there are discussions about Ischemia almost every single day. But the day the trial was released, it was at AHA, and almost 4,000 tweets were sent out the same day. And I read this article, and the author put it in the best way. For the good reason, most of the physicians and academics are skeptical or maybe afraid of Twitter. But in this case, if you weren't on Twitter, you missed out an amazing event, the overwhelming, immediate, and in general high quality discussion about the trial. And I think it's really it comes down to that. When the trials are released, another example, recent ESC Congress and the trials that were published during the Congress, and the discussion that went on and on and on Twitter, it was really fruitful, and particularly to the fellow in training and the early career like me, it gives you the confidence to gain insight into the topic, but also to develop your own opinions, because there are these opinions on Twitter, or the discussions are most of the times the key leaders in cardiology are participating. And that's the beauty of this community, that almost every subspecialty key leaders you take, they are on Twitter, and they are participating in this conversation. So this is basically a CME event, year long, where you don't have to go to the podium to ask the question. You can just type it and ask whoever is the leader that you follow. So I think that was all about the learning. And now I'd like to speak about the other two topics, the clinical and the research development and the visibility that comes with social media, right? So So I think that, again, if we look at the challenges of a millennial trainee, take an average training program in United States. I think the difficulties are that it's, depending on where exactly you are and what's the subspecialty development at that particular hospital or university, it may be difficult for you as a FIT to find a focus. It may be difficult to choose in between the subspecialty, find a mentor who can guide you through this process, have this conversation about the burnout as you're going through training, which we all know is a huge problem. And more importantly, though, finding the opportunity, whether it is educational or organizational or research opportunities during the fellowship, or the job search that comes in the later years of fellowship. So I think I thought that I will share my own personal journey with you. And, I was exactly in this same scenario. So the first time I sent a cardiovascular tweet, my Twitter account was created in 2015. I was at the ACC Legislative Conference, and I saw that they were showing all the tweets on a big screen, PowerPoint screen. And I thought that, I should post something. I want to see my tweet up there on that screen. And that was my first tweet as a FIT, at that ACC Legislative Conference. And then in 2016, I went on to do the imaging fellowship at UCSF. Suddenly, I had been gaining all this knowledge in field of, cardiac MRI, CT. I was learning from the echo legends at UCSF, and decided to tweet way more often as I was going through this process, right? And, also at that year ACC, I tweeted quite a bit because I was liking it, and, was the ACC influencer, and also presented a social media poster dissecting cardio Twitter use at that same ACC. This was picked up by Jack, and I ended up being on Jack editorial board because they wanted me to develop their own social media help develop their own social media platform. I also, at the same ACC through Twitter, I met some of other cardiologists and had my first Jack paper on cardiology radiology collaboration with some of the friends I have now, on Twitter, and started also getting all these requests for peer reviewing. And I was new at peer review. You can probably check out a recent thread that I posted on this. But later in 2018, I found my mentor on Twitter. I identified many sponsors, on social media for myself. This is the year when we published that Jack social media paper. And the most important, I had never met Dr. Deepan Shah ever in my life, but I watched a Barca game first time with the whole Houston Methodist group. And this was at SCMR International. And we had first met virtually and then ended up watching the Barca game. So that was very special. 2019, I had by this, I had gotten already 2 international talks, which was a great amount of deal for me, given the journey I had earlier. And also 2019 got my FACC and had dinner with Dr. Zogby, right? So again, never met Dr. Zogby. It was all virtual, and then got invited by a Twitter friend and ended up having dinner with Dr. Zogby, and that was the longest chat we had. And it was very special, again, given how much tremendously I respect him and I have learned from him throughout all these years since I was a medicine resident. Fast forward February 2020, I'm now on SCMR board, which is very special to me. And I have almost reviewed 30 peer reviews. I have on multiple editorial boards, and today I'm giving a talk to all of you. So why am I saying this is not to brag about my achievements, but to show you that I was exactly like any of you fellows, in 2015. And this journey, has been incredibly powerful for me, and it has shaped my career, and as well as very grateful to this community that I got introduced through social media. So unless you don't want to believe me, he's trying to hide, but he's right there. And Faisal, you are here. and there are other Houston cardiologist. So this is my research collaboration through Twitter, and this list keeps growing, which I'm very grateful for. And how does these research collaboration work, right? So, I just take this example. Dr. Contractor is an electrophysiologist. He works with me. He's one of my colleagues. He's an electrophysiologist. He saw this paper that had some criticism by Dr. Cooper, who's at Temple University in Philadelphia. He identified that the criticism was, he also had the same criticism. They decided to write a letter to the editor and, went for it. And now, Dr. Contractor and Dr. Cooper, Josh and Tehmeed, they collaborate regularly on the electrophysiology papers that they're publishing. So I think that's how these research collaborations have been working, because you're able to find like-minded individuals that have the same frequency as you, which sometimes can be difficult depending on where exactly you are and which institute you belong to. More importantly, once you publish, it's important to showcase that on social media. And why that is because this rise of this alternative metric called Altmetric. So Altmetric is global attention score, and basically shows you how popular of your research study is on social media outlets, on news reports, etc., etc. So if we look at what makes the Altmetric, so news has, if you get cited by New York Times, you're going to get 8 points. 8 points on Altmetric, versus if your science is shared on Twitter, you get 1 point. And if you are the person who's involved in writing this paper, you won't get that point, but it's actually your peers and anyone who likes and retweets. And this is demonstrated on their website, how they calculate the Altmetric. So I to a certain extent, it is a bias-free metrics. So there have been a lot of interest on Altmetric and how it pertains to the downloads and citation for your paper, because we know that citation matters to the scientists and clinicians that are clinician researchers, right? So this randomized control trial, it showed that the social media promotion was associated with more downloads of a journal article. And recently, last month, we were able to show this. What we did was took all the JACC journal papers and decided to correlate the Twitter mentions out of all the Altmetric components, took the Twitter mentions and see if it correlated. And actually, it was a Twitter component that correlated the most with the downloads and somewhat with the citation. And this should not be surprising to any of you, right? Because the community has come together. These discussions have been happening, and it's not surprising that as these articles from JACC are being shared on social media, that probably makes up most for the Altmetric, but also for the downloads which journals are interested in. And this is also true for, case report journals. So this paper is coming out next week, and I was able to collaborate with Dr. Faza. So thank you, Nadine, for your help with this paper. But basically, we again showed that even if you take case report papers, it's the Twitter component that correlate with downloads. Now, with case report, as we all know, citation becomes tricky, but the downloads are important for, the people who are writing the papers, but also for the journals and the journal editors, so we were able to show that even for the case report journals, the Altmetric matters, and it's the Twitter component of the Altmetric that matters more than anything else. So the way I see this is, if you are a researcher and you want to increase the dissemination of your clinical or basic research, I think that social media is the way to go, given the community that is out there. And I think that this also will, give you access to the ideas from other social media users, which in turn may give you another opportunity to collaborate with some of these individuals, provide, and it's kind of like the cycle that keeps giving, right? And for the journals, if we look at, this dissemination is powerful, because now journals are tracking Altmetric score along with citation. But ultimately, one day, there is a European Heart Journal article that showed that social media promotion was also associated with citation, although not shown by any other paper. But I think one day that may be the reality where that visibility and dissemination will ultimately contribute to the impact factor. So we were able to publish this in this JACC imaging paper, and we kind of talked about what's shared broadly and what may be the reason why it is shared broadly on social media, and how do you get here. This is what we want. We want to be shared broadly where we have attention on social media, but also get cited, and we dice it out in this paper nicely. So if you're interested, please check it out. So I think that social media platform portfolio is another thing that has been discussed so far by primarily by Mayo Clinic. They have put together these recommendations on how you could incorporate your social media activity into the academic portfolio, and how this may be meaningful as you go through your promotions, right? So these are the recommendations they gave in 2017. And I know that Dr. Swaminathan at Duke University, he has been trying to develop these new guidelines, as it pertains to the academic promotions. So I think that you probably all know this. Where would you start? And I think that it's basically finding that message that is the most impactful in 280 characters. There are many social media platforms, and I'm active on some others also in addition to Twitter, but I'll highly encourage to start with Twitter if you're not on any, given this the community that is out there, and also the presence of the key opinion leaders that have published tremendously, and by whose experience and the science we can all learn a lot. So this, if you want to learn more, check out this paper that we had in JACC. So I think that if some of you are not on social media, it's okay to be in this stage, right? So it's okay to just make an account and just listen to, and try to learn from the discussions that are going on. If there is a subspecialties that are you are leaning towards, then identify these people that are contributing the most to the content in that subspecialty, and where their opinions that are evidence-based matter. And then eventually, if you like it and if you are up to it, then you can obviously engage more with the community, and that's when I think you probably see all the advantages of social media and full-fledged. But I think that since you are all FITs, we have to tell you what not to do. So I think that it's important to be honest and authentic, and maintain your integrity as you do in your real life, but also online. Content is the king. So as far as you're producing that content, you will grow your presence. And I want to say that this is also very important. That I believe in digital detox, and this is kind of like other full-time job anyone can have, because this is educational stuff that we have been sharing and diving deep into. So have that time to yourself once you are on there. Don't steal. It's a small community. If you steal anyone's content, people are going to know, and it doesn't look good. So anytime you share anyone else's content, make sure you give credit to them. You all know that HIPAA is a very important aspect of all this, particularly when you are sharing cases. Few likes and retweets, but people have lost their job. So make sure you review your institutional policy. I'm the social media director for faculty medical group at Loma Linda, and we actually have developed this really easy online form that anyone, any of the clinicians in the hospital can access online by going on the website. That can be approached, like you can pull it up on your phone, and then by a click, you can get patients' permission, and it gets saved into one of our drives that handles with all the social media content. So review your institutional policy and see where exactly you stent, but don't share anything without patient's permission, particularly given the the HIPAA diversions that that talks about de-identification may not be enough. So be careful with what you share, and obviously respect is most important. So I particularly don't engage into any of the conversations that are offensive or demeaning. Everyone has an opinion, but then you debate that opinion, not the person. So stay professional. Remember that this is your virtual face, and this is what you are showing in your outside world. So be careful with what you need to what you are putting out there, and just some basic stuff. If you won't say it in real life, don't say it on social media. And I always give this example. So this was one of the Times of India article that I wasn't very happy about, criticized the stent, and it was picked up by TCT MD, and there was another article. So you never know who's watching your tweets, particularly given that social media is an open platform. Dr. Leonardo Bailey was the first, pediatric transplant. He was at Loma Linda. One day I wake up and my NP says that you are in LA Times. And I wasn't sure how that happened, but they picked up this tweet that I had put on when he passed away. But these are all good examples, but you don't want to be in that bad example where you are shown, as a physician to the rest of the world, right? So I love to show this slide that I prepared for SCCT 2019. So basically, this was for FIT early career talk, and so the challenges of FIT, we are all aware of it. It's important that you create your own story online, and you have 100% control of your own story, and social media is that light, the prism like light, which brings you these amazing opportunities. These opportunities are out there waiting for you. So climb on to this journey, and then as you climb on, just remember what to do, what not to do, and the podium is ready for all of you, my friends. So this is the voice you are given anytime, anywhere, free and equal opportunity. So utilize it carefully. And with that, I think I have given you elephant-sized reasons to tweet, and hopefully see you all in virtual world. So this is my last slide, and I'm open for any questions.
So Purvi.
Hi, Dr. Parwani, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Hassan. I'm one of the third-year cardiology fellows. Thank you for that talk. It was very, very good. So I'm definitely one of the people who are super scared of Twitter. So I'm one of those silent observers usually. So I just had a couple of things that I wanted to know what your thoughts are on. So for example, if anybody writes a paper, they always have to declare the conflicts of interest and what's in it for them if they're promoting something. But don't you think with social media, obviously some people are going to be more influential than others, then how one can protect themselves from falling into those traps, essentially, because I personally haven't seen this, but nobody declares if they're promoting a product because they're getting sponsored by them or there's some backing behind them. And I just want to know what your thoughts on those situations essentially were.
Yeah, no, those are great points. In fact, I think this was discussed widely on Twitter a few months ago, where this was brought up that the scientists and particularly the clinicians that have conflict of interest, particularly with the pharmaceutical companies, should declare that conflict of interest, in their profile. So, for example, I think that I'm on SCMR board, and I tweet a lot about use of CMR in different cardiovascular pathologies and stuff. But I have decided to put that I'm on the board so that it doesn't come across. I mean, I'm a multi-modality imager, but I want to be very honest with my followers that I do this, but also I'm on the board. So I am for the, for this modality as much as I am on the others. So I think it just depends on the individual person. But I think that for, like most of the cardiovascular researchers, I mean, you would know if they are the key opinion leaders, you would know where exactly they're invested. They may be presenting the trial and stuff, and you already see it getting reflected in the discussion. So that's a great point. About your second thing about promoting yourself, I think that we sometimes I think that we get shy of promoting our on papers and stuff. And I think that if you look at the conferences and when someone goes to give a talk, that's what they do. They are showing their own research, right? So I don't think that there should be any hesitation promoting the papers that you have published. And it's okay to show that this is the work you have been doing, and it's up to your readers and followers whether to believe in the research you do or not.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Parwani.
So, Dr. Parwani, this is Huram. First of all, welcome virtually to Houston Methodist, and I hope we can host you in person too. As always, I learned a lot. I really like the way you broke it down for the fellows, and even for many of us, it was very helpful. And for the fellows, you talked a lot about, and I'm happy that you talked about the niche and developing a niche and using this for visibility and also showcasing their expertise. But, I just wanted to get your thoughts that at times there is a lot of lure of social media. Of course, one of the biggest asset for each of the fellows is their time, where they have to be very wise in how they build their niche. And do you think that if the focus remains on building the public profile versus the focus being on publication of high quality scientific papers being the other, and this valuable tool of outreach and sharing ideas, is there a danger? And of course, how do we overcome that of this form of communication gaining too much higher value that sometimes the junior fellows may lose sight of the key matrices of scientific value? And of course, there's always a debate right now of the Cardition index, and should the early career focus more on their science or being more like social media ambassadors? So how would you advise these early career fellow in training to not also lose sight of what you kept on pointing out about developing their own niche and then just using this as a digital tool for dissemination and communication?
Thank you for that excellent question, Dr. Nasir. Always happy to see you, and I learn a lot from you, so thank you. So I think that question comes up a lot, right? And I think I'd like to answer it in multiple probably parts. So number one is, I personally think that a fellow in training should decide what they want to do, early in the career, right? Whether they're going to be clinician researchers, whether they're going to go into private practice and they're going to be a clinician, or they're going to be into the semi-academic programs where their focus may not be research and it may be education. So I think depending on what you want to do in life, you'll be able to direct the path, right? So for example, that Kardashian paper, it's a great paper, but I think it kind of undermines the what clinicians in community have to offer, right? So there are many private practice cardiologists that are on Twitter, and they produce tremendous amount of content. And I just feel that, for me, yes, publications are very important, but we cannot overlook this entirety of, cardiologists that are out in community who also want to produce content. And, it may be like cases and clinical vignettes that are they are presenting, and it may not be high-end, research output that, someone may be discussing on like an imaging modality or something. But I think that first, when you decide what exactly is your path, if your path is education and you want to, take that platform and educate. So a lot of people have their own websites and blogs, but if you want to use social media and educate people on JVP, one of my friend, he's a UCSF heart failure specialist, and his passion is education, and he has taken Instagram in a completely different way, and he teaches medical students about heart failure in his post. So I think it really depends on what your goal when you come out in practice are. So that's what the content decide, right? If your goal is not to publish and not to be a scientist but be an educator, then social media is a great platform. If your goal is to be the scientist, then yes, you are absolutely right. All of us need that introspection. But I'm sure you have days where you get sucked into this whole Twitter world. I have many days where I feel like, okay, I need to stop. And that's why I talked about the digital detox. So it's always fine balancing. But, that's like in anything else, Kuram, right? So, when we are driving out, on the road, there is always a chance that you may get into accident, but that does not prevent you from driving. So I think that just depends on, on a person and what kind of balance they achieve, putting the content out there, and what exactly their goals in life are. But I absolutely agree with you that focus for a scientist should never be to publish on Twitter, but rather to publish on the scientific paper. And I'd argue that I went to University of Oklahoma for general fellowship, and then I had a very busy imaging fellowship where I learned all the multimodalities, and I had been given these opportunities, but my opportunities for writing papers almost tripled after I had been on Twitter. And that, people were able to pick up what may be my interest because I was publishing on Twitter. And then I was invited to write this, write that, collaborate on this or that, right? So I would argue that, if you balance the platform right, you actually double or maybe triple your opportunities to contribute scientifically, in addition to publishing on social media.
Purvi, that was really beautiful. I want to thank you for joining us today and sharing some of your wisdom in this field that is here. And I think, I don't know, I'll share with you some of my opinions. I've been on Twitter since 2012, first ACC president to even try Twitter. And I had no idea what it was. But I can tell you, as for fellows and faculty, it is probably the most powerful tool to share information that is instantaneous and global. I don't think there is more power than this of anything else so use it appropriately to enhance whatever you're up to, whatever you want to do. If you're a more senior person and you want to advertise, just like Kuram want to advertise his prevention symposium, right? I think that would be good. But for the fellows, I'll share with you some of my advice for them and see what you think about it. One, that I think you should be on it. Because for me, even at times I get information that I may have missed in a journal or the other. And so the information is so instantaneous, just like any of the scientific, you may not be able to attend every scientific meeting. Nowadays are more virtual. So you can get all that information very quickly. And at times you're going to miss others or your usual input of information, you may miss it because it's so large nowadays. So that's one. It is incredibly powerful. Your active engagement will probably come a little later, just because your days are so full as a fellow, right? And I think gradually your engagement will be more and more. And my advice to whoever is going to use it is decide how you want to use it and your time management, because you may feel very good about yourself that you're engaging with so many people and you're dropping other things that you really need to do, including your life at home. So, it can be addictive. So you have to manage it Otherwise, it may be harmful to you because nobody's watching you, you're watching yourself. And last, for the fellows, is the information is instantaneous and most often current, very current, of a topic, of an issue. But particularly first year, second year fellows, you are at the beginning of your learning in depth. And the word is in depth, meaning you're not gonna get the in-depth from Twitter. You're gonna get the flavor, the cherry on top, right? But my advice to our fellows and whoever is make sure that you know the good basis. And there's still a joy and importance of even reading an article that is so important and dissecting, the methodology, the understanding, not only the conclusion, but the many things that go in the research. But it is an amazing, powerful tool that you cannot ignore. You're living now, and you're going to have to engage one way or another. But make sure you balance it.
That's case closed. I mean, you said it the best.
Do you agree?
No, absolutely agree. I think that for time management, I completely agree with you. It's addictive, and you really have to disengage actively. So there are some apps that basically once you download, it won't give you access to any social media. So I personally, wake up, have 1 hour, then I go like MIA, and then engage completely, like in the evening, the way I do with my exercise. So I think that time management is the absolute key, and it can be addictive, and it can put particularly division on your time with family. And
exactly, because this is an additional venue, right? You have everything else in your life, whatever it is that you do per day, but this is an additional one, and you're gonna have to, each individually will have to figure out how and how much to spend on it.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right, Dr. Zogby. Those are golden words.
Yeah. So Purvi, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Deepan Shah. Thank you very much for coming with us virtually today. And thanks to Nadine, who's our local Twitter champion, for putting this together. I think this has been phenomenal. It's nice to see so many of our fellows. I wish actually we had more of our faculty on as well, because I think, I think the fellows, probably are more tuned into Twitter than I think some of our faculty are. And I think for faculty as well, I think it's very important. Even if you're a hardcore researcher, I think this is a very important way to disseminate your message, because I think many more people are going to see this. So I think it's very important that you have to be engaged. I mean, I think, like it or not, I think this is an important part of a cardiology career, especially if you're going into academics, is to be engaged in Twitter and to learn how to be proficient in it. And I'll give you, my background. I didn't really go onto Twitter until 2018. It was basically because I got a paper published in Jack. They said, congratulations, your paper's accepted. Now give us your Twitter handle and give us a tweet. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, I got to figure out how to work this thing. And I'm still learning. And I think so, things like this are very helpful for those of us that maybe are a little bit more seasoned, let's say, who are not so attuned to some of these new social media, just how to navigate this. But I do want to, maybe pick up on the comment that other folks have made. And maybe if you could share a little bit more about your digital detox. I mean, you said you have a certain amount of time that you spent. And I'm sure that there's kind of an itch to say, oh, let me get on again. And how do you prevent yourself from doing that?
I think that it's an active process, like, the way you have to put time for your exercise, the way you have to put time for other things that are important for you. I personally, the schedule that I follow, as I was saying, in the morning when I wake up, after my exercise, I get onto Twitter. I, tweet out some stuff. And then I really, like, when I'm in hospital, I go off it, because otherwise I know that, things would suffer, like my fellows are with me, and I just don't want to be engaged on a digital platform, and rather be real in my life, and, contribute to my patients and fellows. So I go off it completely at work. Maybe at lunch hours, I'll, pick it up again as I'm having my lunch or something. And then later in the evening, when I come back, I'll catch up on everyone, that had commented something on either my tweets or that have mentioned me into their tweets, and probably produce the content. So, content is the key. And, to producing content, it takes time, right? Because, particularly for someone like me, I'm still, I'm still trying to figure out, or the building opinions on these all key messages. So producing content takes time. So particularly like a tutorial or something. So that, you'll have to engage like as if you are writing a paper and, put everything together. So I generally do those things, on weekends. But on a regular basis, I would either, like put out a case or something, or, I would share a journal article or something like that. But I think, digital detox, there are days where I just go off like, for 7 or 14 days, and the world keeps going, everything keeps going, and you come back and you may have 1,000 tweets, but that's okay. We miss the, it's okay, because that, when I come back, I'm way more recharged. And what we forget is this is, like some people think that this is for fun. It's not fun. It's it's another thing for my career that I'm doing, right? For me to, it's an educational activity. So I have to put a lot of effort in it. And it requires time. And so that's how I see it. The way I take vacation from my clinical work, I'm going to take vacations from Twitter, and I've done it. And I come back recharged, ready to engage, and people don't forget me. So it's all good. Once you come back and you just, tweet again, the world is yours again.
Back.
And it's good to reassess from time to time your own. You said, nowadays, multitasking is part of the game. There's no question about it. At every level, life is so fast and so multifaceted. It's good to kind of sit and reassess how you are doing. If you're pulling your hair for time, let go of something.
Yeah.
And refocus. I think it's a good idea, and good habits to learn from fellowship all the way to, graduations.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much, Purvi. I love the discussion. I agree with all the comments, and I joined Twitter as a second-year fellow, and I can tell you from my personal experience, it definitely enriched my educational opportunities. I used to get all these journals at home. They would, stack up, and I'd look at them and I'd feel so guilty of not being up to date. And now, I just opened the accounts of the different journals, and I feel like I'm more up to date. So I feel like I'm making better use of my educational time. So as a fellow, I had my educational hour. So it was either spent browsing the different journals or looking for the hashtags for the topics I wanted to learn about. So in terms of education, I felt like it saved time for me. Again, time management is key. When I'm on vacation, I don't tweet. I agree with Purvi. I think of it as a professional platform. So I deactivated my Facebook, my Instagram, my Snapchat, all these other purely social platforms to make time for a more professional platform that would benefit me educationally. But I agree, you still have to keep, make time for your research. You still have to keep, have dedicated time for your clinical practice, because that's something on top. It complements what you have, but it can't be all you have. So I agree with all the comments. It's a very, very powerful tool, like Dr. Zogby mentioned, and to maximize its use is to make sure you're using it properly. So thank you so much for being with us, Purvi, and thank you for everybody who's watching.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.